Пані та панове, далі у рамках саміту «Діти»
Ladies
дискусії
and
про те, як
gentlemen,
захистити
further on
дитинство.
in the summit,
ЮНІСЕФ максимально
children
залучає
is,
дітей та
we
молодь,
will speak
зокрема
about
із
protection of
інвалідністю,
childhood.
участі у
UNICEF
громадській
is trying
діяльності,
to
формуванні
protect
екологічної та соціальної
young
політики
people and children,
спільно
in
із
particular
владою.
with disability,
Ідеї
jointly with the
такого
government. And the idea of this
конструктивного
constructive
залучення молоді до
involvement
процесів,
of
що
young
безпосередньо впливають
people in
на
the processes
майбутнє,
directly affecting the
є
future
ставлення у бік
is
сприйняття
changing
молодих
the
як
attitude
цінних
towards
партнерів,
perception of young
діалогів,
people as
досліджень,
valuable partners
програм
in
та
dialogues,
ініціатив,
programs and
що
initiatives.
впроваджуються для них. Пані та панове, я запрошую на цю сцену
So let me invite
ЮНІСЕФ,
the UNICEF
питань інклюзії,
envoy on
Яніса Макдевіс.
inclusion issues, Yanis Magdavis. You're welcome.
Hello. Before I start with my keynote, I need to tell you something personal about me. Because when you look at me, you might notice something. You maybe think, well, he needs a lot of time in his daily life. And yes, that's true. It's a very time-consuming activity every day, every morning, for my hairstyle. Oh my goodness. And I will come back later to this example because I would like to use the time now to speak about characteristics. But first of all, I would like to say happy birthday. Happy birthday to UNICEF. Happy birthday to every child in this nation. Happy birthday, basically, to any child in this world. And I'm very honored to have the opportunity to speak here today, to speak about my vision concerning social inclusion. And if we are talking about social inclusion, I'm convinced we have to talk about mentality, about stigma, about culture. And we have to talk about how can we succeed to reach every single person in the society. Because inclusion is not something that we can form here on the stage or in politics. Inclusion, it's about the belief of everyone in this society. And I'm convinced we can only reach everybody in this society when we talk about positive examples, positive stories that can show what else can be possible. I would really like to use the time now to talk about stories and to talk about characteristics. Because what really is the difference between us? Is it that I'm sitting in this wheelchair? Okay. Really? Is the difference that I'm sitting on the ground now, not able to move? Well, really? What really is the difference? I'm convinced that every single person on this planet is identified by different characteristics. For example, in my case, my blonde hair, or my blue eyes, or that I'm from Germany, or that I work as a speaker and UNICEF ambassador on social inclusion. And somewhere in this list, of course, I have to state I was born without arms and legs. But you know, for me, this is only one point on a very long list of characteristics. But when it comes to an outside view, when I speak with other people, the belief is that a disability is on the first place of this list. But that's wrong. A disability is only one point, one characteristic on a very long list that identifies people. I would like to talk about my story a little bit. About a story, what is possible when you think and when you really believe in inclusion. Because when I was a child, I never realized that I was different. In fact, I always felt like a normal child, like everybody else. When I was a child, I wanted to become a motorcycle policeman. And I was sure that I would become a motorcycle policeman later. I never doubted it. I never doubted that I had the chance to become a motorcycle policeman. Of course, I was aware that I didn't have arms and legs. Of course, I was aware that I drove a bright yellow wheelchair, but for me, it didn't make any difference. For me, it didn't have any relevance. And the good thing is, all the children, all my friends who were around me in the kindergarten, they also didn't see the difference. And that's what I realize until today. Children don't see the difference. Of course, children are curious. Of course, when I meet children for the first time, they are curious and they have curious questions to ask. What can you do with the wheelchair? How fast can it go? And you know how cool this is. And if you manage to answer those curious questions in a very honest way, children don't see the difference anymore. It's us, the adults, the education, who teach the mindset of differences. And that's why I would like to highlight that it is urgent to start the inclusive mindset right from the beginning. Every single second we are waiting. Every single second a child has to be separated in an institution. We are losing a chance. We are losing the chance of a younger generation, of a generation that thinks in an inclusive way. I grew up with my foster parents. And my foster parents always wanted me to raise up as normal as possible, but also as independent as possible. My parents always encouraged me and they empowered me, they supported me, and they always told me, Jannis, your missing arms and legs should never be the reason not to do something. It is about the support. But if you don't have this chance of being supported by your family, by parents, no matter if they are biological parents or foster parents, if you don't have this support, you're facing a much higher risk of living a life separated from the rest of the society. And in my case, of course, my world was destroyed at one point. My world was destroyed first by my own perception, but also by the real world around me. The real world which suddenly seemed to tell me, you are not normal. You have a disability, like a stamp, like a mark. You have a disability. You need to be excluded. You need to be separated. But why was this separation made because of that? Why do we make a separation because of a disability? Why don't we make a separation by the color of our hair? Who decided this? By chance, it happened that I was born without arms and legs. This is nothing I am responsible for, or anybody else in this world is responsible for. This just happened. We need to talk about how can we support children and their parents and their communities. My world was destroyed when I was 8 years old. I was at our home, and our home was not barrier-free. So I had to move around without my wheelchair, and then this morning we have been in a hurry, and I was jumping on the ground to move forward a little bit faster, and suddenly I looked into the new mirror. And I was shocked, because this was the first time I realized, well, you only have a body consisting only of a torso and a head. My dream of becoming a motorcycle policeman was destroyed in a second. But not only by my own perception, but also by the world around me. And I started to fight against my own body, to fight against myself, because I just wanted one thing. I just wanted to live a normal life, like everybody else, like my friends in the school. But was that asking too much? I started to hide myself because I was ashamed of my own body. I started to only sit in my wheelchair because as long as I'm sitting in the wheelchair, I don't have to show too much about how I move. And when I was 17 years old, so after 9 years of fighting against myself, I asked myself, what life do you want to live? Do you want to live the life of someone fighting against himself? Or do you want to live the life of someone following his own dreams? And I made the most important decision of my life. When I was 17, I decided to really appreciate my body, to really appreciate myself, who I am. And this changed my life completely. I'm very glad that my way and all the people who accompanied me along the way has brought me here, even onto this stage at the National Summit. But this could only happen because we all thought and believed in the opportunities and the benefits. If we are talking about inclusion, we are talking too much about the deficit. We are talking too much about the problems that could occur. And of course, there are many problems and there are many things to be done. But I would really like to see that we switch our deficit-oriented view towards a positive-oriented approach. Because I'm convinced an inclusive society is a society without limits. I'm convinced that when we understand what potential lies in treating everybody equal, what potential we have when we really manage to use all the skills and competences inside of our society, then we are a society without limits. And in concern of this, I actually have a vision. Because I want to live in a world where the characteristics that distinguish us do not lead to distinction. I want to live in a world where everybody has the same chances right from the beginning. No matter how we look like, no matter where we come from, no matter of our gender, no matter if we have a disability or if we don't. I want to live in a world where we understood that the difference is our equality. And I'm very grateful for the days I was here in Ukraine. Thanks to the invitation of UNICEF, we made a little tour in Kiev. And I have seen many things around this country. First of all, we had very good discussions about inclusion. And let me say just some few words about what I think inclusion means. Because inclusion is about being there, participate, and to contribute to societal relevant processes for everybody. This is inclusion. And I think this also shows that the discussion around accessibility and barrier-free environment, of course, it's a very good discussion. But accessibility is only the first step. It's only the preparatory step. Inclusion starts when everything is accessible. Inclusion only starts when everybody has the chance to sit at the table. When everybody has the chance to really contribute to societal relevant processes. Unfortunately, today is my last day here in Ukraine. And I would like to draw a little conclusion. Because I'm leaving, on the one hand side, with a lot of hope. And on the other hand side, I'm leaving with a very strong feeling of urgency. Urgent actions need to be done. Why do I leave with hope? First of all, I leave with hope because during the last days I've met with many activists in Kiev. First of all, to mention Lina Deshba. I would really like to thank you here, she's sitting here, a very strong activist on deinstitutionalization and on inclusive. Thank you very much. I have also met the Paralympic sportsmen and sportswomen of the Ukraine. People who are internationally awarded. People who have a very strong voice. And I'm convinced that they have the chance to lead the way as positive examples in this nation, in this country. But you know, this is not enough. I would really like to see all those people in every TV program of this country. I would like to see all those people in every newspapers of this country. And not somewhere on page 10 or 20, no, on the first page. That's what inclusion means. I want to see people with disabilities in every single position of a city, in every single position of a society. No matter if we are talking about judges, about lawyers, about police officers. This is inclusion. And this gives me a lot of hope to see that there are many people with strong voices. And of course, my talk, my speech in the parliament, together with Lina, and thank you very much again for this, gives me a lot of hope as well. Because what we saw is that all the parliamentarians stood up and gave standing ovations. And I think it's a good sign. But you know, we should not stop at this point. This can only be the first step. And now we need to take action. Because standing ovations alone don't change anything. Of course, it's good to see people united, politicians united. But we need to remember everyone in this country what we are talking about, because inclusion is not a topic of social task. It's a topic about rights. The Ukraine has also signed the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And I think we should remember ourselves, and we should remember everyone in this society what this means. That we are talking about rights, the rights of people with disabilities. And last but not least, we discussed a lot about possible ways. We discussed about positive things, positive examples, like in Kiev, for example, the low-floor buses, which is a very good progress in the last years. But we also discussed that inclusion is not just about ending an unfair system. It is about creating a new system, creating a better one, creating a fair system and a fair vision. And my vision personally is that I want to live in a society where we understood that the difference is our equality, that having equal opportunities means nothing other than everyone has the right to oh my goodness, now my English is lost. That everyone has the right to need something different. I want to live in a society where we understood that people don't have a disability. It's the environment who disables the people. Thank you very much.
Дякуємо. Дякуємо. Пані та панове,
Dear ladies and gentlemen,
серія
still ahead we have a series of highly important and informative dialogues between journalists and experts, and we will discuss there
молодіжної,
the
дитячої
issue of youth, children policy related to social policy for children and youth.
що стосується
And we will also discuss the reality of the last 2 years, like COVID-19
про все це ми
and the pandemic. That's all we're going to speak about today, together with the participants of our discussion. And the first discussion is going to be dedicated to the right to family as a fundamental right of every child. Then we'll move over to the next discussion about the right to equal opportunities, because children get into poverty more frequently than adults. And it's not just about lack of money, but about access to opportunities that develop a child and his or her vision. And then we will also have a very important dialogue dedicated to the right to health through the prism of the COVID-19 pandemic. The healthcare problems have become more acute, and therefore we will discuss these issues. So let me invite to the stage the participants of the first discussion. This is the discussion dedicated to the right to family, fundamental right of every family, because it's only in the family that a child can develop on a full-fledged basis and be happy. Let me invite the journalist Svitka Berezivska and the head of the UNICEF Child Protection Program, Naira Avetesyan. You're welcome.
Добрий день.
Good afternoon.
Цілий день слухаю.
So all day long I've been listening about very important things in the field of child protection, but I would like to tell one story to Naira. I am a social journalist and I deal with the topics of reform of boarding schools, preservation of families for children, and for 3 mornings in a row, I start with the messages of a mother from Khmelnytsk region who has many children. She has 4 children, and she writes every morning, "Please help me
Не відправити в інтернат.
For my 4 children to stay at home and not to be taken to the boarding school." I have a financial crisis. I don't have some benefits paid by the state. But when I addressed the social service, I was told that, okay, if you cannot cope with your children, give their children away. So it's a cry on her side, cry for help. And I realized that she is writing to the reporter, to the journalist, when I'm just the last resort. She's addressed everyone, all the volunteers, officials. And we have had the reform of boarding schools for 4 years, and we speak about support of families, but here is a specific case. So what do we have to do? And Naira, what do you think? Why do we still have stories like this? Why is our reform a little bit slow, and when we will be able to change this in Ukraine, as you think?
Thank you for this very important question. I've been working in Ukraine, soon it will be 4 years I'm in Ukraine, and one thing that is evident is that still Ukraine heavily depends on the old system for child protection and child care, which is institutional care. Unfortunately, in the mindset of many stakeholders, many professionals, even social service providers, the only solution for a family that is at risk situation or facing a challenge because of poverty, because of domestic violence, etc., the only solution is seen as placement of a child in an institutional care. And that's a big, big challenge. It's a big challenge for the family itself, it's a challenge for the community and for the society in general. And to change this situation, first thing we have to do is, first of all, to change the mindset of people. Change the mindset of all people at all levels, starting from family to community leaders, to teachers, to healthcare providers, social workers, but also to politicians who should understand that no single institution, even if it's a five-star hotel with the best staff, best caring and professional staff, can replace a loving and caring family for the child. And in order to keep the child within the family, to meet the best interest of the child, one definitely has to provide support to the family. Ukraine has wealth of benefit system, and I always talk about this to my colleagues because this is the, I'm with UNICEF, soon it will be 20 years, I'm with UNICEF in different parts of the world, in different countries, mainly working on child protection, but also on disability issues. And what I have seen is that, unfortunately, instead of looking into investing in families with more targeted support, investing through benefit system, but also through provision of social services, social support to families at risk, what we do is just we distribute those benefits and we think that's enough for them. And Ukraine, in my experience, is the only country that has more than 130-something types of benefits and 40-something categories. Does it mean we are really reaching those that need this support? I'm not sure, because to me, benefit systems should be targeted, should be temporary very often. Of course, we are talking about universal benefit system when it comes to child benefit system, etc. But it should be more targeted, tailored to the needs of specific families. And what is missing for families like the one you mentioned is really targeting support. Targeted support should be done through social services, through accompanying those families to make sure that they have access to education. And last year, I think today it was Minister of Social Policy that mentioned the case. Last year, because of COVID lockdown, overnight 42,000 children were just sent back home without preparing their families. And those were, many of them were children who hadn't been to their family for several years, who had no ties and links to their families. And what we ended up with was children returning to families where there was violence, there was abuse, there was neglect, but also many returned to extremely poor families where there was no even table for a child to do lessons. And of course, I'm not talking about different gadgets that are required for distance education. And our reaction was, what should we do for those children? And together with partners, the first reaction was really to do assessment of situation of around 3,500 children in 5 regions. And what we found out, yes, poverty is one of the reasons why children end up in institutional care. And unfortunately, when we talk about internet system in Ukraine, we often think of special education institutions for children with disabilities, but we know we have a large number of institutions for socially vulnerable, so-called social orphans, who are not orphans because they have at least one family. So what is really needed is to shift our attention from institutional care more to community development programs, to developments of social services, and to more child and family-centered approach in social protection, and more targeted approach. I think we are already there, but in terms of vision, but it's an action in progress, but it will take time. It will not happen overnight. And what I see is that more and more communities, more and more local authorities understand the importance of creating social services. And what is missing in general, and I had been talking about this for almost 3 years, is that to make sure that all the ongoing reforms are not implemented in parallel, that they are somehow working together, supporting or working towards child and the family. Because we have ongoing decentralization reform, we have deinstitutionalization reform, health reform, education reform, etc. And they are all implemented in parallel. And by the end of the day, they are addressing the needs of people living in the community. So most probably the first solution would be to make sure at the highest level that there is a vision for children and families in this country, and that all the reforms should be, first of all, targeting people. Because, as Yanis mentioned, we need to create an inclusive society, and for this, we really need the reforms working for people, but not being implemented on their own without having clear vision for whom and how they are going to be implemented. I hope I answered to your question.
Так, ви відповіли.
Yes, you have answered my question. Thank you.
Просто цікава ваша оцінка.
I'm just interested in your assessment. You know that the reform of boarding schools, institutional reform, is slow, and we still have about 70,000 children who are actually growing up in their boarding schools. They get education there. They sometimes go to their parents, but not often. So what about our situation as compared to the situation in the neighboring countries, in other countries, which somehow cope with this situation, and what would you advise to us?
Again, to me, the situation is really complicated because we have different types of institutions, around 700-something institutions under the administration of different ministries. We have institutions under the administration of Ministry of Social Welfare or Social Policy. We have institutions under the administration of Ministry of Education, so-called boarding schools or internats, and of course, we have baby homes under the administration of Health. What happened in many countries in this region is, since institutional care is a kind of child welfare, child protection issue, all those institutions were, first of all, brought under one umbrella, under one administration. That was number one step. And of course, in a situation of Ukraine where we have really large number, around 351, I guess, different boarding schools under the administration of education, what is really important to do is maybe to separate the function for protection and care from function to education, or for education. Because majority of those children, what they need is access to education for children that are in institutions under the Ministry of Education. But because of limited access to education in their communities, what we are providing is we are telling, hey, family, you have no other solution than to send your child maybe 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers away from home, just to live in an institution because we cannot afford granting your child access to education within your own community. And it's not always about inclusive education. It's about the will. Yes, for many children with disabilities, of course, the country heavily depends on specialized system of education. Again, this could be provided without full board, without keeping children there, at least sending them on weekends. And we hadn't made any effort to do that. And this is one challenge. The second challenge, as I mentioned, without having family support services, daycare centers, for example, for children with disabilities, early intervention centers, early identification system in place, or prevention programs for violence against children, domestic violence, that will really make sure that there is support to the family that is in crisis, there is a support to family that has stress, and then this is not reflected on the overall health and well-being of the child. It's difficult really to implement. So deinstitutionalization definitely needs a few key priorities in this country. First one is changing the mindset of people, shifting from Soviet mentality that state and institutions are the best place to provide care and support to families. The second one is, of course, making sure that all reforms work together so that communities really prioritize services for vulnerable families, for poor families, for families of children with disabilities, and creating those network of integrated social services that will address the multiple needs of families living in the communities. And the third one is to make sure that all professionals working with children have clear understanding what is the best interest of the child, and to make decisions not just because they have to protect the rights of staff working in institutions. This is also important, but also to protect the rights of children. And what the other countries have done in the neighborhood, and Ukraine is still lacking behind, and this is the reason also why the institutionalization reform didn't happen. In many countries, we were not talking about closure of institutions. We were talking about transforming those institutions into services for families. We were talking about individual plan for each child, individual plan for each institution, for each employee in that institution, so that employees do not feel threatened that they'll be kicked out to the street. And of course, we don't end up in a situation where we close the institution and just send children back to community without providing them access to health, access to education or rehabilitation. And this is what's happening, unfortunately. I know I was among the first ones also with our partners, with NGO partners, fighting against those who stopped the deinstitutionalization reform in the country, because I believe children cannot wait. Children cannot wait until Ukraine will come up with a comprehensive system to ensure social services for every family that is in need, but also children cannot wait until Ukraine will implement those reforms. Because by the end of the day, Ukraine has a good strategy on the institutionalization based on international standards, based on UN guidelines on alternative childcare. But what is missing is accountability. And people should be held accountable, all stakeholders, why they hadn't done what they committed to do, because there are international commitments, there are commitments under the Convention on the Rights of a Child, under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and those conventions, those international treaties and treaty bodies affiliated to those conventions are demanding that all the commitments are met, and Ukraine is showing progressive realization of rights of children, including children with disabilities.
Пані Наїра, от ви дуже правильно сказали.
Thank you, Naira. You've been right in saying that children cannot wait.
У мене ще одне питання.
And I've got one more question.
Була запланована реформа.
Child houses or daycare houses.
Реорганізувати.
We actually intended to have a reform to reorganize these houses, not to have little babies there, infants there under the age of 3 who are affected the most as a result of staying in an institution and not in a family. And I've heard from the ministry a very shocking figure that per 300, that the figure has increased by 300 of children. And we were supposed to send these children to families and not to institutions. So what do you think we should do to at least at least protect those little babies, the smallest, and find families?
First of all, I mean, especially those days, I'm talking a lot about impact of institutionalization on development, on brain development of young children. There is global evidence. There are series of Lancet articles, international research about serious impact on development of brain and development of cognitive development, emotional development of every single child, young child below 3 or below 5, placed in institutional care. There is enough evidence. What is really strange to me to see that many stakeholders do not care about this. They still believe that if they have good staff working in baby homes, and they have more staff, like we have seen even like 10 staff per one child, which is even higher than international standards. They believe that this will help to stimulate child growth and development. It will never do that. And the reason why we are not having good results is, first of all, I didn't talk about this, but prevention is a must. And my international experience shows that you can get children out of the doors, they will come from windows because there is a demand. Because parents have no means. You have too many single mothers who abandon their children because there's no one working with them. Because in reproductive health services, there's no counseling for those mothers, and there's no child abandonment prevention program as in many parts of the world. Also, we have seen worsening situation because of COVID lockdown, and COVID heavily hits the economy of every country, including Ukraine. So the poverty is increasing, families have no means, and the only solution they have is really to refer their child. What is really interesting about Ukraine, if you look into the number of children, parents deprived of parental rights, whose children are in institutions, is not that high. Which means that parents are placing their children temporarily in an institution, hoping that if they are given further support, they will take their children back. This is a sign. Unfortunately, no one deals with those families. And the little experience that we have through different pilot projects shows that if you work with this family, if you ensure job opportunity for those mothers and fathers, if you provide further support to the family, they will overcome all the hardships they had, and they will take their children back. So for Ukraine, really, to have the moratorium being implemented for baby home transformation, first of all, we need to create, to support biological families, to prevent placement of children, but also family reintegration, but also to think of alternative family care options. Unfortunately, family-type alternative care is really limited in Ukraine. We have very little number of short-term foster care families that will deal with emergency cases when there is a need for temporary placement, but also we have a limited number of other types of family care, like long-term fostering, small group homes, etc. The numbers are not enough. So in order to address this issue, definitely country needs to develop quickly alternative care, and it's possible. And we are talking about family-type alternative care because one clarification, institutional care is also alternative care, but it's the worst. It's the last resort for every child. So for transformation of baby homes to happen, one has to definitely need of prevention, creation of alternative care options, and family reunification as much as it's possible for as many children as possible. So that would be my proposal. And we are trying to work with different law ministries, bringing together Ministry of Health with Ministry of Social Welfare to address this issue, also different stakeholders. But this is not an easy solution if at community level there is no prevention. There's no support. And the last message maybe I want to give about this is that every child really needs a family. And it is important to make sure that children live in loving, caring family. I told that. But not every family is a loving, caring family. Unfortunately, several years ago, maybe around 10 years ago, UNICEF did its research, and the research was called The Familiar Face. And this is about violence against children. So unfortunately, in many parts of the world, including in Ukraine, family that is supposed to be the place where the one protecting the child, children are facing violence. So what is really important is to work with those families, to build their capacities, to make sure that we start positive parenting classes as early as possible. I would say even starting from schools, so that really young people graduating schools, graduating universities, youth really has skills and knowledge how to build relationship, how to take care of their family members, how to take care of their children, because this is also contributing to prevention, and without positive parenting skills, it's really difficult to build these relations. And COVID further aggregated this situation. So we all are affected by stress, and we can see more and more violence within the families. We can see more violence against children. So the only solution is really to build a healthy society, inclusive society, and supportive society. And the support should be around the family and the child.
Я можу сказати лише, що дякую ЮНІСЕФ.
Thank you. I would like to express my gratitude to UNICEF for controlling the most painful issues of child protection in Ukraine. Thank you for helping. I know that you've got a number of projects at which you are currently working in order to improve the situation for our children, for them to be brought up in families. Thank you.
Дякую.
It has been my pleasure to have a talk with you. Thank you. Thank you. That was the first important dialogue that we announced. And the next dialogue, the next discussion is the right to equal opportunities. Unfortunately, children get into poverty more frequently than adults, and poverty is not only about a lack of money, but about access to equal opportunities. And let me invite Vladislav Holovin, the founder of the Project Fathers Club, the author of Books for Parents, and Natalia Boruchuk, the head of social policy projects from UNICEF.
Доброго дня.
Good afternoon.
Пані Наталя,
So, Natalia,
дякую організаторам за запрошення.
first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers for having invited me. And Natalia, the problem we are going to discuss is really important and relevant, overcoming poverty. And normally this issue is discussed only as poverty in general, poverty related to all the strata of the society. Why does UNICEF pay more attention to poverty among children? Thank you for the question. Well, really, poverty among children is a special problem, since it's not only poverty, but also inequality, unequal opportunities are going to be the general topic of our discussion today. Since, children are born in different families, having no choice. Inequality is not only about inequality of income, it's not only about the monetary, financial problem, but it's about lost opportunities and lost dreams. As far as poverty is concerned, recently UNICEF has conducted a large-scale analytical study and has shown that, first of all, in Ukraine, though Ukraine is not an exception here, and as well as many other countries of the world, the poverty of families with children is much higher as compared with families with no children. Also, as the head of UNICEF in Ukraine, Murat Shakhin, has mentioned today, under the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, poverty has grown up to more than 47%. And here we again speak about families with children. A couple of more figures. First of all, the results of our study have shown that poverty is the highest among families with many children, with more than 3 children. Families where children are younger, from 0 to 3 years. And when we studied poverty among urban and rural residents, we also saw that poverty is lower only in very large megapolises, while in small towns it's close to that of rural areas. Of importance when we speak about poverty is also to remember that in Ukraine, starting with 2015-2016, the level of poverty started rapidly decreasing, and that is because of the state effort and the effort of all of us. But unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic there is great risks in this respect, and the level of poverty has increased again. UNICEF keeps researching poverty of children because it's not only about unequal start. Unequal start also is accompanied quite often by the environment, which does not allow you to go out of this poverty cycle. But our task is not only to show the figures, but to suggest some solutions. So I hope that such platforms as the one we are in today will become a kind of an impetus for solution search. Yeah, the figure of 47% is really impressive.
Частина бідних сімей, правильно розумію?
This is the share of poor families, right? This is the share among the families with children who live before the poverty line. So it means that almost half of Ukrainian families are affected by this phenomenon.
Пам'ятаю,
And if I do get you right, you had this study before the lockdown, right? Before the COVID
ми знаємо,
pandemic. And
це сказали, що
we know it for sure
після
that
цього
probably after that the situation became even worse. So do you have any assumptions as to how worse it has been become, how aggravated it has been? Yeah, the figures we are mentioning is the most recent data. This is the data that includes the effect of COVID, and the situation has really worsened. But unfortunately, the UNICEF forecast, which we declared in April, has come true. But we also analyzed the influence of different systems of social protection, social care, and we were pleased to point out, first of all, that the system of social protection in general has enabled more than 1 million families in Ukraine to stay above the poverty line, and only the social support programs for families with children ensured that more than 150,000 children were not under the poverty line. It has been mentioned today a couple of times that attention should be paid not only to the families that are below the poverty line, but also to the families which are above the poverty line, but run the risk of getting into the extremely poor families. In our study, we also focused on the analysis of the challenges, and also we analyzed the solutions, and we offered 10 possible solutions as to how poverty of children could be reduced in Ukraine. And you know, UNICEF slogan is for every child, which means equal start for every child in his or her life. And we don't want this lottery at birth to predetermine the future of the child. It's really important, primarily for the state, but not only for the state, because poverty is a comprehensive problem. So it's important for the state and for everyone to be involved, to involve the civil society, private sector, international organizations, because only by joint effort can we ensure reduction of poverty, in particular among children. And as UNICEF, we keep stressing that poverty is not only about violation of child's rights, but poverty also has a great economic negative consequence, because, you know, a child growing in poverty will run greater risks of staying poor in the future. This also affects competitive ability of the economy of development of the state and many other fields, because poverty is the problem which has something to do with almost every aspect and every domain. That's why it's important to really ensure this comprehensive approach, and we hope that such platforms will allow us to unite the society around this problem and around looking for solutions.
Говорити детальніше.
And probably we need to speak in greater detail about such things, because one of the solutions which I remember voiced in that study was the economic policy that will manage to increase the GDP of the country, and that will have a direct impact on overcoming poverty, including poverty among children. But that is the issue which depends probably more on the government and on a great number of stakeholders. And it's really difficult to do something in this direction. So let us speak about some other ways of overcoming poverty. What could be done by NGOs, by civil society, by business?
Того, щоб цю ситуацію
What could they all do to improve this situation?
Перед тим, як відповісти на ваше
Before I give the answer to your question, I would just like to mention a couple of other points, because our today's topic is equal opportunities. So let me show where this inequality lies.
наприклад, освіти.
First, let's speak about education. The recent PISA international study conducted in Ukraine among students of high school has shown that there is a great gap, a great differences in the performance among students of rural and urban schools, and also students of ordinary secondary schools and lyceums, grammar schools. Let me just give one figure. The difference between the average statistical student of a rural school and urban school is considerable and is about 2.5 years of training. Of studies. Also, there is an inequality in access to services, educational services, as I've already mentioned, healthcare services, because not everyone can get access to these services. And this is not just about access, but this is also about the quality of those services. And to answer your question concerning the search for solutions, I would like to say that poverty is not just a financial monetary problem. It's a multi-aspect, comprehensive problem. And if we speak about an integrated, comprehensive approach, we need to realize that it should include both improvement of access to basic services for every child in Ukraine, a child living in a mountainous area, a child living in the Ryan Center, a child living in Kyiv, because even children living in large cities are, well, among them, there are also some children who face the different types of deprivation. And in our study, we also analyzed the inequality in deprivation, and we saw not just two figures, I mean, not just inequality in accessing the infrastructure. 22% of rural students, rural school children, do not have their daily connection to the town or city with good infrastructure. But also children in cities may face some problems like pollution. And our study has also shown availability of the problem of lack of housing area. And during COVID-19, it became a real problem. And as far as decisions are concerned, the first solution here could be education. Many UNICEF analysts claim that education remains almost the only socially effective lift in the state. Another pilot is a social care system, effective social care system. In Ukraine, we have a good universal program of support provision to children at birth. Universal coverage is something many countries are heading for. Ukraine has already got this program, which has been functioning for quite a period of time. But it's also important to understand that these benefits have not been revised since 2014. That's why monthly payments made to families do not actually provide for the subsistence minimum for a family, in particular when that is a single mother. So no indexation happening since 2014. Right, yeah, no indexation, and we hope that by joint effort we somehow ensure further development of this program, because UNICEF analytical data shows that this program has the largest effect on overcoming poverty in this category of people, families with children. Why? Because that is not a targeted program, but that is a universal coverage program. Benefits are paid to all the families where children are born, and benefits are paid for 3 years. Since families with little children are most vulnerable, and normally the mother or the father doesn't work, and therefore this is a universal program, but it is perceived as a fair program by the society, because it's really not easy to bring up a child. And this requires some support, and families hope for the state support. As far as involvement not only of the state is concerned, so your question was about the private sector, civil society, business. So this may well refer to ensuring access to high-quality services for every child, healthcare services, educational services, and this may also refer to private sector in terms of ensuring decent labor remuneration and decent conditions of work that are favorable for families with children. Recently, some positive changes have occurred because certain legislative acts have been passed that kind of equalize, level up opportunities for taking care of the child for the father and for the mother. That's a positive step forward, but still a lot of things need to be done. My assumption is that if we speak about large business and about the involvement of the state, when we speak about the development of territories, construction, it's not always the case that this issue is really somehow linked to access to kindergartens and schools. And we know a lot of examples when large areas of buildings are built, and then it appears that these young families and children don't have some vacancies in schools, in kindergartens, and there may be 40 children in the class at school. Of course, that has a negative impact on the quality of education. So I guess that here the business has some role to play, and civil society can also encourage construction of more kindergartens and schools. Yes, that's true. That is one of the possible steps and directions. And we know that over the recent years, many positive changes have occurred, aiming to ensure improvement of the situation. You know, we have a paradox. When children in rural areas sometimes don't have access to high-quality preschool education, but at the same time, in urban areas, families sometimes have to stand in long queues, in inverted commas, asking to accept their child to a good school. But as many speakers have already mentioned today, we cannot stop at this point, because there are still a lot of issues to be settled. And as far as education is concerned, that is particularly relevant now during the pandemic. The pandemic is still going on, and UNICEF at the global level is stressing that schools
Садочки
And
повинні
kindergartens should
максимально довго
be
відчиненими, адже
open as much as possible, because
це не є
online studies is not a full-fledged replacement, substitution of offline studies. And we can already clearly see it, and UNICEF is monitoring the situation, that online studies have affected the most vulnerable families and children where parents probably didn't have enough time to pay attention to their children and their studies because of their great load. It's not that you always have access to high-quality internet, computers, or some technical facilities. That's why already now it's important to think it over how to help those children in the future for them to keep up, not to stay, not to lag behind. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for all your answers. I hope that the dialogue, further dialogue, will help us solve those problems. Thank you. Thank you. And I really hope that this lottery at birth will not predetermine the future of the child, and by joint effort we will manage to improve the life of each and every child in Ukraine. Thank you.
Дякуємо. Надзвичайно
Thank you. A very important and informative talk. And let's listen to one more important dialogue about the right to health. Due to the COVID pandemic, the problems of the healthcare system in Ukraine, as well as throughout the world, have become more aggravated. So let's discuss this problem with Serhiy Hryschak, doctor, neurosurgeon, director of the Children's City Polyclinic number 6 from Odessa, and Katerina Bulavinova, medical expert of UNICEF.
і бажаємо змістовної
Welcome.
дискусії.
Ну, першу фразу я взагалі не почув. Потім вже того, що Владислава закінчити, тоді вже почув.
Ну, це проєктна робота, тобто там пише...
Дякую.
Один з найуспішніших лікарів України.
So you're one of the most successful doctors of Ukraine. What would you like the healthcare system to be like in 2030 for children in Ukraine? What would be your vision? What changes would you like to have? Thank you for saying that I am a good doctor. You know,
те, що, мабуть, болить мене зараз, так? Я б хотів,
I feel
щоб це
frustrated
було там
about several problems, and I would like these problems to disappear in the future. So the major pain in the neck is vaccination. I'm already tired of speaking about that, but if you think that everything is already clear with vaccination, I need to repeat 1,000 times these things. So my dream is that we don't waste time on
когось там треба було
speaking to
якось переконати.
parents or somebody else in order to convince them. It would be good if we had communication like this. Hello, good morning. You are registered for vaccination today, and the answer would be yes, we will come. And that will relieve the tension both for the doctor and for the parents and generally for the society. And there will be no broadcasts like or TV shows like vaccination is the evil thing or something like this. And those anti-vaccination campaigns will be something very strange. That would be my vision for the future.
Ні.
And will we have
Буде ніяких
epidemics, I mean polio epidemics or something else? No.
цей полі.
And when we speak about polio,
Буде тако.
that will be like this. We will just forget about it in the future, what polio is.
Дифтерія, правець, туберкульоз.
Measles, tuberculosis, diphtheria, so we will forget
Глобально важливим
about it. It's my dream. What do you think is really important for the health of children in Ukraine? Since I'm the head of the Children's City Polyclinic number 6 of Odessa, I would like to say that prevention is always the key thing. It's always cheaper than treatment. That's why I would actually take the most effort to ensure prevention, early identification of some problems. And if these problems appear, also I would advocate early intervention, the direction which we already have in Odessa region, in our children's polyclinics. And we see a great demand from parents because, well, that enables them to earlier interfere into the problem and to improve the situation, and that the child and the family will only benefit from this, because this is not just child-centered but family-centered activity. Everybody will benefit as a result of that. And can you explain what it is? Because it's not always the case that even doctors know what it means, family-centered. Well, the family is in the center. It's all simple. For example, one of the visions of our polyclinic is that if a family or a child somehow gets to our polyclinic, we pay all the attention to every specific person. If we speak about early intervention, we cannot somehow affect the condition of the child if we don't work with the family. That's why early intervention is a substantial direction currently available abroad, and we also have some signs of that. But we don't have any systemic, comprehensive approach, so I'm really happy that the Ministry of Social Policy and the Ministry of Health start paying more and more attention to that. And when there was the UNICEF initiative, community-friendly to children and youth in Odessa, we just had one room back then in our polyclinic, but now we are already a center. We provide some training courses. We need to understand that early identification stands for early identification of some pathologies, or if the pathologies cannot be identified, then at least you can somehow be on alert in order to respond whenever it's necessary. For me, good pediatrics is about effective management. Where from are we going to take these effective managers in pediatrics? How do we arrange things for us to have so many people as you, like you? Well, that is a very tricky question. I don't know even what to start with. Well, you cannot be born an inborn manager. Maybe there are some features, but that is all about skills. And you, of course, need to get some skills somewhere. Therefore, these schools of transformation are important. And I would like to express my gratitude to UNICEF, because it was there that I came to understand during the transformation schools when I got there for the first time that I understood that that is kind of a club of interest, and there are so many people like me. That is great. That is cool. That is about training, about communication, borrowing somebody's experience from abroad. That is the process of evolution. That is like a school of managers, but it doesn't happen overnight, and I don't think that this can happen in the way other than evolution. What about medical leaders in pediatrics? What should they be fighting for? For early intervention, for vaccination? What are the problems? Protocol treatment, because there are a lot of questions asked by parents. A doctor is following a certain treatment methodology, but that is no longer medicine. That is awful. And the medicine of the future is evidence-based. That's for sure. And I think that this is a challenge for the managers, for the clinicians. We need to really have evidence-based medicine.
Говорить наразі про дітей
What
в медицині.
are the concerns
Я хотів
do you have?
Про які ще групи ти
What are the groups of children are you taking care of?
Це, як я на початку
Well,
казав,
as I've already mentioned,
болить.
I have several concerns, several problems, and actually these are children with orphan diseases, which we can see not only in our polyclinic but in other regions. But if we take it locally, we have children with diabetes mellitus, and we all understand what kind of golden standards there are available, and what gadgets we have, what sensors we have, bombs. But for some reason, the state always lacks money for such families. That's why local budgets are trying to allocate some money, but that's not a systemic approach. I'm also very much concerned about orphan diseases,
Як кажуть, смайлики, да, спинальна мізова
children with spinal muscular atrophy. And, you know, treatment is really expensive. Parents are trying to collect money through charity actions in order to save their children. I think that that should be performed at the state level, and there appear from time to time some draft laws about orphan diseases, children with orphan diseases,
це буде. І я розумію,
but
що це не
they are not adopted yet. And
ці категорії
I realized that something should be done about that, because every category of children with orphan diseases requires our state support, because local support will not help.
Що ти скажеш про
What could you tell about the development of the healthy way of living among children? Is it about schools or is it about doctors? And if we speak about teenagers, should doctors speak to them about nutrition, or should it be done at school?
це всі, бо
Everyone should do it,
вже чесно кажучи,
Everyone should
це
talk to them.
в першу чергу батьки.
starting with parents.
І коли така компіляція є
And
батьків,
when
які,
we have this combination of
це
parents
лікарі,
supporting this idea,
які не тільки,
doctor
знаєте,
who
займаються, ой, коли ти там щепився, що то
doesn't only care about vaccination or about some flus,
тільки образування,
and
і все.
teachers not only caring of education. Well, we have the combination of three components of people who take care of the development of this healthy way of living. Well, that would be good, but again, there should be a systemic approach to that. Because, you know, when there appeared the School of Family Medicine, like pediatrics, and we now have family doctors, and the family doctor is like a part of the family. So he should know what the hobbies of the child are, what the child goes in for. And that's why we created in our medical information system the windows in which we have some specific information. For example, if a teenager comes to a doctor and it's written there, hobby, football or basketball, and the doctor starts communication with, and what championship did you participate? It's like a small trick, but the child really thinks, wow, you remember that. He is impressed, and it's really great. So you consider that doctors could speak to a child about football or sports. Yes, that's for sure. But now, in particular, everyone feels very much tense. I mean, everyone is afraid in the period of COVID to be asked different questions. That's why we speak only about COVID. And I really want us to find a way out of this pandemic and to get enough time for communicating not only about diseases, but about hobbies as well. Another important point in terms of communication, and we are already doing this at our polyclinic, is when a child comes, regardless of the age, the doctor treats this child as an adult, speaks on equal terms, right? Yeah. It's like, could I do this or that? Could I have a look at your hand, at your arm? Or let's make an injection. So communication right communication is a good thing. You may ask for permission, not ask parents for the permission, even if it's a child under 14. You are supposed to be asking their parent for permission, but it's about respect. You need to ask the child. Yes, because this will build this communication, this dialogue that will help you out of many situations, like in vaccination. We have already had precedents when parents actually object to vaccination, but a boy who is 14 years old or 16 years old says, and I'm in favor of vaccination. That's great. What has COVID changed for healthcare professionals, and what would you like to have for HCPs in the future? Well, the pandemic has shown us that learning is always great, and we need to use individual means of protection, gloves, masks. So after some inspections, we understood that actually we don't know how to wear all of them. Secondly, each of us already tries to ensure safety in every possible aspect. And we've come to realize that prevention is important, like vaccination. That seems to be the only possible way to protect ourselves. And the use of such simple things as social distancing, temperature measurement are also important. These elements of infection control, they should always be in place, regardless of whether we are living through the pandemic or not. Because when we started making some steps towards this good infection control, the acute respiratory diseases rate actually went down. And HCPs have come to understand it. And by the way, this year, the number of people among HCPs who have contracted the disease is much lower. Would you like to work with a psychologist? Would you like doctors to work with psychologists? You know, in our polyclinic, we have a mobile palliative care for children, and the main demand coming from parents is for psychological support. I do realize that this is a highly demanded service, and the psychologist doesn't even have time to pay proper attention to all the families. So I think that, yes, in the future, it will be important for communication, for
Нам з тобою дали тільки 15 хвилин.
depriving oneself of bad ideas, of negative ideas. You know, we have one more minute, so please tell the final idea. I just wish everyone to stay healthy as a doctor, because without the health, you cannot have dreams, you do not have positive ideas. So for you to have wings to fly, you need to be healthy. You need to stay sound. And if you are healthy, your family, your relatives are healthy, that is a precondition for something great or something bigger, for a good mood. And all the other things can still be borrowed somewhere, I would say. So stay healthy.
Дякую тобі.
Thank you. Thank you.
Дякуємо за
Thank you
змістовний діалог.
For this
Дякую.
highly informative dialogue.
Буквально за
So,
хвилину ми
In
повертаємося
about a minute, we are getting back
панельних
to the
дискусій,
panel
сесій.
discussion
І наступна
format,
тема
and the
на
next
завершення
topic will be the final one, and it's really important. This is reconsidering the future for every child, new challenges and opportunities.
Раньше не было воды, и мы ходили через все село набирать на колонки.
Редко-редко сюда доходила вода, только утром, и только если ты попадешь, мы и грязные ложились, бо не хватало воды. Баллон 38 ты принесешь, Или покушать готов, бо многодетная семья, 6 человек. Или стирай, что-нибудь одно.
Готовили только на покупной воде. Стирка была только в том случае, если вода идет с нормальным напором, потому что машинки ломались.
Сети, построенные в 60-е и 70-е годы, были в аварийном состоянии. На данный момент выполнено строительство водонапорной башни 25 метров кубических. Также предоставлены материалы для ремонта существующих сетей водоснабжения.
Поменяли трубы, поставили башню. Сейчас в любой момент можно взять, напиться, хозяйство накормить, огород полить.
Сейчас есть вода, и это очень хорошо.
У мене є рідний брат Олександр, він працює в МНС і він займався саме ліквідаціями пожеж. Тому я не з чуток знаю, як важко було людям. Ми вирішили відновити ліси, які постраждали внаслідок пожеж. Ми висадили вже понад 1000 саджанців. Мої однокласники та деякі вчителі також брали в цьому участь. На центральній площі ми висадили 30 декоративних яблунь. Вони дуже приємно пахнуть. І через 20 або 30 років мені буде приємно ходити по цьому парку та дивитися